I'm a huge fan of the Dark Tower novels, and for this review I'm going to assume that you are also a huge fan of the novels and have at least a working knowledge of the story and lore. If you don't, then this is not the review for you. I will start by pointing out the glaringly obvious negative points about the characters, setting and plot. Jake Chambers is, for some reason, the main character of the film. Jake's psychic power is no longer called The Touch and is now called The Shine, presumably a pointless reference to The Shining. Jake and his family do not resemble his family as described in the book. He has brown hair instead of blonde, he does not appear to come from significant wealth, and Greta Shaw does not even exist. He does not die to get to Midworld, but instead has visions of it, and the plot skips ahead to the dilapidated mansion on Dutch Hill, which contains a technological portal which Jake uses to get to Midworld for the first time, after being swept up by the demon which he appears to banish by simply telling it to go away. Roland never sacrifices Jake in order to catch Walter, and so Jake never says, "Go then, there are other worlds than these." Jake's relationship with Roland feels forced and artificial due to the time constraints of the film and the absurd amount of plot they had to cover. So when Roland is teaching Jake to shoot in some abandoned building in New York for some fucking reason, there is no real connection between the characters, and this is a skill Jake never ends up using anyway, so the gunslinger's mantra is utterly wasted. Fuck this movie. Stephen Deshane, Roland's father, does not look at all as he is portrayed in the books, and not just because he is now black. He is no longer tall and thin, gone is the heavy handlebar moustache, and he's shown in a last stand with Roland himself, meaning that Roland's last stand was now not with Cuthbert and Elaine at the Battle of Jericho Hill, but with his father. Stephen was killed long before the events of the Dark Tower book series, in the invasion by John Farson, the Good Man, and the fall of Gilead. In the film, he is shown standing with Roland, and they both have an identical pair of guns, which is by itself absurd given how Roland inherited his guns from Stephen after Stephen's death when Roland was a child of 14 after defeating Court. Fuck this movie. At no point is the gunslinger actually chasing the man in black across the desert, despite the immortal line being uttered near the beginning of the film. Walter's magical powers have been extended to absurd lengths, beyond what was given in the books. Walter wasn't a fire and brimstone sorcerer, more of a trickster magician, changing his identity and predicting the future, not killing people with magic. Walter kills Roland's father by simply saying, "Stop breathing," at what I assume is meant to be the Battle of Jericho Hill. He also has the ability to catch bullets now. He isn't a cerebral villain. He doesn't seem to play games with Roland anymore. He doesn't laugh infuriatingly at Roland's expense. He isn't luring him on and teasing him. He doesn't cloud his perception. Matthew McConaughey is actually a good choice for Walter, but the character is very poorly realised. In Mordred's absence, the gunslinger kills Walter, which, while being more satisfying from a storytelling angle, is done in a really silly way, with Roland firing one bullet directly at Walter, and then firing another bullet at a different angle which ricochets off a metal beam, catches up with the first bullet, knocking it off course and preventing Walter from catching it, and entering into his body. It's ludicrous, and not just because, as good as the gunslinger is meant to be, even he probably can't shoot bullets out of the air, but how the fuck did one bullet fire at an angle, hit a bullet fired earlier and travelling along a shorter trajectory? More bizarrely still is a significant portion of the movie is being told from Walter's perspective, completely removing the mystique inherent to the character and showing him operating from a high-tech base. Fuck this movie. Anything involving Eddie, Susanna, Mordred, the Crimson King, or Stephen King was stripped out completely. The drawing of the three, Wizard and Glass and Wolves of the Colour, are almost completely absent, aside from what I assume to be River Crossing, which now apparently has its own portal, and instead of using the Manny, and is not populated just by old people but by younger families with children. Blaine the Mono is gone, as is Lurd, and anything from that period of the story. It's practically all gone. This film was pointless. Fuck this movie. In regards to the Dark Tower itself, the mythology of the tower is confused and glossed over, if you can believe it. There are allusions to the beams in the film, but when we see Al Ghul Siento, the children are strapped into chairs and they fire a ray of energy that attacks the tower itself rather than the beams supporting it, making the references to beamquakes utterly vapid. Fuck this movie. And now we get to Roland Deshane, the gunslinger himself, a supporting character despite being the man around whom the entire story of 7 novels and the fate of the fucking universe revolves. Stephen King wrote The Gunslinger in 1982 and based the character of Roland as a homage to Sergio Leone's Man with No Name from the famous Dollars trilogy, combined with the medieval knightly mythos of the Song of Roland that inspired Robert Browning's famous poem Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came. From this rich basis in Western lore, Stephen King created a marvellous character, blending the imagery of the Wild West with the chivalry of medieval France. King was explicit from the start that Roland was a science fantasy version of Clint Eastwood's character, right down to the description, which is consistent across all 7 books. One of a tall, lean man with a weathered face and intense blue bombardier's eyes and a 1,000-yard stare. A man whose very appearance speaks volumes about his history. King describes this in the 2003 revised edition of The Gunslinger, in which he describes how, in 1967, he watched The Good, the Bad and the Ugly in a movie theatre, and by the halfway point of the movie, he knew he wanted to transpose this character into an epic, sweeping fantasy setting, saying, quote, "I wanted to write a novel that contained Tolkien's sense of quest and magic, but set against Leone's almost absurdly majestic Western backdrop, and Clint Eastwood appears roughly 18 feet tall, with each wry jut of stubble on his cheeks looking roughly the size of a young redwood tree. To cast a man who does not look like the spitting image of Clint Eastwood in the role of Roland Deschain is an absolute travesty. Every single reader of The Dark Tower knows precisely what the Gunslinger looks like, and he doesn't look like a muscular black man with clean clothes and a finely trimmed beard. I am sorry, but this is just unacceptable, despite King's own politically correct Twitter protestations. You put this image in our mind, Stephen, not us. And because it's a hot button topic right now, it's just completely fine to renege on the design of the character regardless of how iconic it is. Fuck you and fuck this movie. Idris Elba is a fine actor, but this is not the role for him. The entire movie looked like some kind of high-priced fan fiction, with Elba cosplaying as his favourite fantasy character. Seriously, after spending 1,000 years chasing the Man in Black across a desert, over and under mountains, through jungles, swamps, and fighting innumerable battles, who the fuck is cleaning his clothes? Where is he getting such a neat haircut? How is he maintaining this level of muscle mass when he has such little food to survive on? These incongruities add up and make the entire thing dumb. Roland isn't meant to be physically intimidating, he is meant to be psychologically intimidating, but instead, the terse, otherworldly gunslinger is remarkably talkative and emotional for the duration of the film. He spends bullets like they're going out of style, not like he doesn't know where he might find them again, even before he arrives in our world. He's meant to be a mysterious lone wanderer, and willing to make emotional connections to others who will inevitably die before he does on the journey, as Walter points out in the film. The premise of the film was a joke. Trying to pack 7 epic novels into 90 minutes of screen time is a fucking stupid idea, and the person who decided to do it is an idiot. This film should have been called The Dark Tower Part 1, The Gunslinger, and it should have faithfully recreated the first novel of the series, taking its time with the epic grandeur of the setting to recreate the feeling King originally felt when he first watched The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I heard talk of how the movie was meant to represent a continuation of the story after the events of the novels, and that this time Roland had the Horn of Eld, but I saw no evidence to support this, although perhaps I was being unobservant. Either way, the movie was the absolute worst example of Hollywood taking a good and valuable property and completely butchering it. After being trapped in development hell for a decade and changing hands between half a dozen directors, they shat out a film completely devoid of meaning or purpose, but it was presented as if it were a deep and meaningful experience, with poorly done Easter eggs thrown as call-outs to fans of the books that frankly felt like a slap to the fucking face. The Dark Tower movie was standard Hollywood action schlock, dripping with crappy CGI, the kind of shit in which you'd expect to see Jason Statham star, coated with a greasy layer of ham-fisted pseudo-Dark Tower mysticism to pander to fans of the canonical material in a desperate bid to recoup the cost to make it. This film was a fucking abortion from start to finish, and it completely deserves the 16% score on Rotten Tomatoes it received from critics, and I presume the 57% viewer rating is due to the legions of dumbass Fast and Furious normies it must have sucked in due to the appallingly overproduced trailers that preceded it. Fuck this film and everyone who decided to make it, but most of all, fuck Stephen King for selling out what he described to be his magnum fucking opus to a bunch of Hollywood hacks to spin for a quick buck in an attempt to capture the widest possible audience and pandering to the PC busybodies in the process. This was a complete waste of everyone's time and money, and it should never have been made. Don't even bother pirating this movie, as you'll never get the hour and a half of your life back. Fuck this movie. Oh, and they're thinking of making a sequel with all the main actors reprising their roles. My advice is, don't.